Welcome to Chapter 10, the Senses. Before we begin Chapter 10, you should recall the information learned in Chapter 8, which was the nervous system. In the nervous system chapter, we discussed the structure of a neuron and how neurons are required to produce a stimuli. In this chapter, we will talk about the senses, and the stimulus is going to be provided by that neuron. Sensory receptors are structures that detect stimuli. Sensory receptors are primarily located on the skin. Sensory receptors develop action potentials. Recall from Chapter 8 that the neuron structure has dendrites, which receive a signal, the cell body, which processes the signal, and an axon, which transmits the signal or impulse. In the axon, threshold was reached, which created an action potential. Sodium channels opened, sodium rushed into the cell, and caused depolarization. For a stimulus in the senses chapter to cause anything to happen, you must have that action potential provided by that neuron. Sensory organs are structures that are composed of nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is made up of neuroglia and neurons that respond to a certain stimulus. Sensation is the awareness of a stimulus. The sensation that is created is determined by the brain area receiving the nerve impulse. For example, as you're hearing my voice, the stimulus is going to go to the temporal lobe of the brain, and the temporal lobe of the brain's job is to decide how that sound is received or perceived. Vision is another example of a sense in which the occipital lobe of the brain would be processing that sensation. Other sensations are things like hot, cold, pain, pressure. Each sense depends on sensory receptors, whose job is to detect change, to decide that something is different. For example, something is hot or something is painful. This forms those nerve impulses and the action potential. Sensory neurons carry that nerve impulse to the CNS, or central nervous system. Recall that the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. And lastly, the brain's job is to interpret that nerve impulse to decide how to respond in things like reflexes. Types of senses. We have general senses: touch, pressure, pain, temperature, and itch. These senses do not have special organs who do their job. They are primarily located in the skin. Special senses have specific organs, things like your nose detects smell and your eyes detect vision, who do the job of sensing. Special senses include smell, taste, sight, hearing, and balance. Hearing and balance are combined because your ears not only allow you to hear, but allow your equilibrium or balance. We will focus primarily in this chapter on the special senses. We're going to touch on the general senses first, and then the rest of the chapter will be each special sense. Simple nerve endings. Free nerve endings are going to detect things like warm and cold. They are receptors for things that determine if you should pull your hand away from things too hot or too cold. If you look at the image on the right side of the screen, you see a stimulus, and then they see the word free nerve ending. You see unmyelinated axon. That axon has to transmit the action potential down the length of the entire axon because nodes of MVA are absent because it is not myelinated. You also see the word cell body. This is very similar to a regular neuron structure. At the bottom, you see a picture of a skin because most of these sensory nerve endings are going to be located in your skin. Nociceptors detect pain, and everyone responds to pain differently, which we'll get to on the next few slides. Hair receptors are around the hair follicle, respond to movements of hair, trigger the blinking reflex. So for example, if you were on the beach and sand was blown into your eye, you would automatically blink without even thinking about it. and these hair receptors would be activated. Proprioceptors detect movement and body position. So figure skaters, gymnastics, snowboarders, etc., any sports where the person is doing flips and turns, they use proprioceptors to make sure that they're not off balance and that they know their body position and don't fall. Again, the figure at the bottom is of the skin, and you can see the location of these simple nerve endings. It also shows that many of them are in the dermis or the epidermal regions. Chemoreceptors are receptors that detect chemicals. When we discuss the taste and smell sensations, we will talk about chemical odors more specifically. Photoreceptors are receptors in your eye located in the retina, specifically in the rods and cones that detect light. Thermoreceptors detect temperature changes. They would allow your body to determine homeostatic changes, things like hot and cold. Pain. Everyone has a different pain threshold. So what is pain? An unpleasant perceptual and emotional experience, which is kind of a strange definition. So for example, if you have a 2-year-old who has just had a nap and a snack and they're very, very happy, and they go outside and they fall down the driveway and they skin their knee, they may fuss a little bit, but they're probably going to get back up without too much drama because they're in a good mood and they've just had a nap. That same 2-year-old, 3 hours later, that's now hungry and tired, barely even falls down. It may be very dramatic because they're receiving or perceiving that emotional experience very differently, and it's going to be a lot more of a big deal. Types of pain. One type of pain is localized pain. It's a sharp, pricking, cutting pain. It has rapid action potentials. So one example of a localized pain is a paper cut. You have that paper cut and you feel that pain right away, and then it typically goes away. Or if you cut your finger with a knife or something, it's in the spot where the pain is coming from, the damage is coming from. Diffuse pain, burning, aching pain, slower action potential. So now let's say that you have a toothache. So that toothache may start in your tooth, go to your jaw, potentially down your neck, maybe causing headaches, and that pain is radiating out from the initial source. And it can last for days or weeks depending on how quickly you get treatment. Referred pain originates in an area that is not the source of pain, felt when internal organs are damaged or inflamed. So the picture on the left is showing where pain could be a symptom of something that's wrong with you. So for example, the lungs and the diaphragm are further down in your body, but it's showing actually in that green region that you could be having pain in your shoulder or neck. Same with the gallbladder or liver. On the picture on the right, the man is having a heart attack. And so the pain is radiating from his heart down his left arm. It's really important when you go to the doctor, if you're not feeling well, that you give the doctor all of your symptoms, even if it's something that you don't feel is significant, so they can properly diagnose you. Because it's possible that you have pain from another area that's actually originating from referred pain. Pain control. So local anesthesia is medication that is injected into the site of surgery. So for example, in this picture, the person is getting a shot in their tooth or their gum. Maybe they're going to have a cavity extracted or a filling or a tooth extracted, was what I meant. So that's where the site of the medication is going to go. The purpose of that medication is to suppress the action potentials. No action potential, no pain is perceived. It basically numbs the nerves from responding, from creating those action potentials and depolarizing. General anesthesia is the loss of consciousness. So in general anesthesia, usually the surgery is a little bit more serious. You would definitely want an anesthesiologist who's a doctor who's been highly trained to give you the proper medication, to give you the medication. The anesthesiologist's job is to make sure you get the right amount of medication and they don't administer it in the wrong place. If they give you too much, you could not wake up from surgery, which would not be good. If they give you not enough, you could wake up in the middle of surgery. If they inject it into the site of the spinal cord or wherever they're injecting it that's not the correct site, you could also be paralyzed. So we really want to make sure that the anesthesiologist is giving us the medication in the right location. Taste. So now we're moving on to our special senses. A fancy word for taste is gustation. Your taste is going to occur primarily in your taste buds. Your taste buds are located in the bumps called papillae of your tongue. Each taste bud contains chemoreceptors whose job is to detect chemicals. These are sensory structures that detect taste. Taste buds are on the papillae of your tongue. So when you stick out your tongue and go, I burnt my taste buds, or I have an infected taste bud, technically that is the papillae. So inside those bumps on your tongue are the taste buds. They're on your tongue, on your hard palate, and on your throat. Your hard palate is the roof of your mouth. They contain taste pores that then contain taste hairs. So take a moment to look at figure C to see kind of how all these components fit together. So you can see the pores, we're going to get to hairs in a moment, and taste cells. The whole thing is the taste bud. Chemicals must be dissolved in liquid to activate taste buds. So for example, if you were to put a cracker in your mouth, your salivary glands start to produce saliva. That saliva breaks down the food into a liquid. The liquid then activates those taste buds, which allows you to determine different types of tastes. Inside each taste bud are 40 taste cells. So we're just getting more specific as we go through how we actually taste. Each taste cell has taste hairs that extend into a taste pore. So for us to be able to actually taste and determine whether something tastes sweet or salty or bitter or good or bad, we have to have an action potential. So what you're going to see for the theme of every single sensation is we're going to talk about action potentials and what part of the brain is going to process those action potentials. So how does taste work? Let's put it together. So we have the same figure that we just had at the bottom. Taste buds pick up the taste and send it to the taste cells. Step 2, the taste cells send the taste to the taste hairs. So we're just getting more specific as we go down the list. The taste hairs contain receptors that initiate an action potential, which is carried to the parietal lobe of the brain. So as soon as we create an action potential, that's when depolarization and threshold have been reached. Recall, the parietal lobe of the brain's job is to evaluate sensory input. The parietal lobe of the brain is located on the top or crown of your brain. The brain then processes the taste. And again, everyone determines what they think tastes good, which is probably different from someone else, because our brains are all wired slightly different. Types of tastes. We have sweet, salty, bitter, umami, and sour. So let's start with sweet. So when I say sweet, students often say an example of sweet are things like chocolate, but not necessarily. Chocolate could be bitter, depending on the amount of sugar that's been added. So sweet primarily is just basic candy. So it's not Sour Patch Kids, it's things that have lots and lots of sugar. So we have gummy bears in that picture. It could be just good old sugar cookies, etc. Sour. When you eat something sour like a lemon or a lime, you almost feel the back of your tongue curl up from the sourness on those taste buds. Salty. Pretzels, peanuts, popcorn, etc. Lots of salty. Bitter. Unsweetened chocolate, like bitter chocolate squares, like Baker's squares. Dark chocolate. Unsweetened coffee or tea. Those are all very bitter. Umami is one that often students don't know what that is. Umami is a savory taste found in a lot of Asian foods, and it has things like MSG, which is monosodium glutamate, which you don't need to know. A lot of savory foods are umami. Depending on where we are in your tongue, you have more receptors of one taste in one location. So for example, it says certain taste buds are more sensitive to certain tastes. If you were to eat a lemon, you're going to almost feel the back of your tongue curl up because that's where those sensory receptors for sour are kind of on the back of your tongue. Taste is also linked to smell, which is why if you have a cold, like a respiratory infection or a sinus infection, and you have lots of mucus, sometimes you're not very hungry because your taste is linked to smell and smell is linked to appetite. So extra mucus in your nasal cavity means your smelling is reduced, which means your taste is reduced also. Olfaction. Olfaction is another special sense. Olfaction is your sense of smell. So what is it? Your sense of smell. Occurs in response to odors. Receptors are located in your nasal cavity and palate. There are 10,000 different smells that a human can smell. Animals, depending on the animal, can detect way more smells than humans. So that's why many animals have the ability to kind of sniff out things like dogs that sniff out drugs or different medications, therapy dogs, etc. So before we leave this slide, let's look at the picture. So in the picture, we see the hard palate, which is that bony palate, which is the roof of your mouth. We see the nasal cavity, which is when you breathe in through your nose, where all of those odors are going to go. And at the top of that, we see where it says fibers of the olfactory nerve, which then synapse. If you recall, a synapse is a connection, and it's going to synapse with the olfactory bulb and tract. So where is the olfactory bulb and tract located? That's correct. It's located in the brain. The olfactory bulb and tract are cranial nerve 1. So what happens is those odors come in through your nasal cavity. The olfactory nerve is going to synapse or connect with the olfactory bulb and tract of the brain, and the brain helps process that sense of smell. If you look, the olfactory bulb and tract are near that frontal bone, which is also going to be in the frontal lobe of the brain. If you were to have extra mucus for whatever reason in that nasal cavity, that signal, that odor getting to those neurons would be lessened. How does olfaction work? The nasal cavity contains a thin film of mucus where odors become dissolved. The olfactory neurons are located in the mucus. And no, if you blow your nose hard enough, you're not going to blow those olfactory neurons onto your Kleenex. Dendrites of the olfactory neurons are enlarged and contain cilia. So let's talk about why that might be. Throughout the day, whether you're in a public place or even potentially at your house or cooking food, your body is constantly processing or getting different odors. So those dendrites are really big because their job is to work really hard all of the time to get those different odors. And you have cilia, because if you recall, cilia's job is to move things across the cell. Well, in this case, cilia's job is to move those odors across the cell, and so that you will process them, process the smell, and move on to the next smell. And we'll look at a picture of that shortly. Dendrites pick up the odor, depolarize, so there's been an action potential, sodium channels have opened, sodium rushed into the cell, potassium went out of the cell, the inside of the cell became more negative, and they carry odors to the axons and the olfactory bulb, which is cranial nerve 1. The frontal and temporal lobes of the brain then process the odor. And again, everybody processes smells a little differently. The frontal lobe, if you recall, is in the front of your brain. And besides odor, it also is in charge of things like motor functions and some moods. The temporal lobe of the brain is on the side of your head and also is in charge of hearing, which we'll talk more about when we get to hearing. So here's a picture showing at the top what's happening. So at the top we have the odors, those little green dots, and you see blown up with the arrow in letter C, one particular neuron with its olfactory hairs and its dendrites and its cilia, and it's bigger than normal. It's then synapsing, where you see the word axon. It's connecting with the olfactory bulb and tract, which is again located in the brain. So the bottom picture is showing the actual brain on the underside. It's showing the olfactory bulb, which kind of looks like antennae, and the olfactory nerve. So again, other animals besides humans have enlarged olfactory bulbs and nerves, so they have greater sense of smell than what we have. So think about when you are at someone's house or you're in, let's say, an airport, that your body is constantly being bombarded with different odors. So as you travel, down a corridor or wherever you are, you're getting all those odors. Your body's going to process those odors, and then you're going to move on. So if you go to someone's house, and whether it smells good or bad, whether it's smoke or it's an apple pie baking, once you're there for a certain period of time, you don't notice that odor anymore because you've already processed it. Then when you go home, you might be able to smell on your clothes wherever you were previously. So it's kind of a memory-based idea also, but your body does not keep processing that same odor over and over because that would take too much effort. Vision. Vision is probably the most complicated of all of our senses that we're going to talk about today. And vision starts with what we call accessory structures. These are structures that you don't actually need to see. So this includes your eyebrows, whose job is to protect from sweat and shade from the sun. Your eyelids and eyelashes, whose job is to protect from foreign objects. And by lubricating the eye through blinking. So again, we're back on the beach and sand has gotten cooked up in our eye. We're going to automatically blink or wink to try to get that sand out. We need our eye to be nice and moist, so that's what that blinking also does. So here we see some pictures of some more accessory structures. We have what's called the lacrimal gland, some muscles, and something called the conjunctiva. The conjunctiva is a structure that is located on the inner surface of the eyelid. It's a thin membrane that covers that eyelid. You might have heard of conjunctivitis, which is known as pink eye. And you're going to think to yourself, well, the inside of my eyelid is not where it's red. It's the actual sclera, which is the white part. But every time you wink or blink, you're rubbing that eyelid, meaning that inner surface, that conjunctiva, on the sclera white part, which transmits that infection, causing that pink color on the sclera white part. The conjunctiva also helps lubricate your eye. The lacrimal apparatus's job is to produce tears. And if you look in the picture, the lacrimal gland and the lacrimal sac are connected to the nasolacrimal duct. So that's why when you cry, your nose runs, because those are connected. So part of the reason why when you cry your nose runs is some of those tears are actually going into your nasal cavity. The bottom picture is showing extrinsic eye muscles. These are eye muscles that help move the eyeball. They move the eyeball up and down and side to side. You don't need to know different eye muscles, meaning particular ones, just know that extrinsic eye muscles, that's their job. So before we move on to the next couple of slides, I would go ahead and go into your PowerPoint packet and pull out the pages that have the eye diagram and then the corresponding table that goes with that. I'm going to go through with you how to label that eye diagram, but I'm suggesting that you try to label it without me first, and that way you see if you have the answers. One of the things that you're going to have to be able to do is label an eye diagram and then give the functions of the eye structure.